Okay, the next item of business is debate on motion 19984 in the name of Douglas Ross on behalf of the Education, Children and Young People Committee on widening access to higher education. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I call on Douglas Ross on behalf of the Education, Children and Young People's Committee to speak to and move the motion around about 9 minutes. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to open this debate on the committee's inquiry on widening access to higher education, and I move the motion in my name. Can I begin by thanking all those who shared their knowledge and expertise with us, and to my committee colleagues for their diligent work on this issue. In 2016, the Commission on Widening Access recommended that by 2021, 16% of full-time first-degree university entrants should come from 20% most deprived backgrounds. By 2026, that figure should be 18%, with an overall national target of 20% by 2030. Scottish universities met the first interim target ahead of schedule in 2019-2020. At least 16% of full-time first-degree university entrants have come from the 20% most deprived backgrounds ever since, although it has to be noted that progress has stalled since 2020-2021. Back in 2016, the Commission also recommended that by 2021, students from the 20% most deprived backgrounds should represent at least 10% of full-time first-degree entrants to every individual Scottish university. And I'll speak more of that in a bit. The Commission further suggested that there be a review of that target in 2022 and a higher level target should be considered for subsequent years. Now, our inquiry considered the progress being made on widening access, focusing on these issues. What is needed for colleges and universities to meet the 2026 target? What access initiatives are showing success? Whether the work of the Scottish Government and partners to introduce additional data measures is progressing, and when and how this might be incorporated into targets, and what access challenges exist for disabled, Black and minority ethnic and care experienced students out with SIMD 20 areas, and what might be done to address these challenges. So I want to take a bit of time to look at the key findings of our report and some of the recommendations we made to the Government. And I specifically choose to start on the unique learner number, because this is something that we heard a lot of evidence about. It takes up a big part of our inquiry report, and there was a very clear recommendation to Government. The original Commission on Widening Access report in 2016 recommended the introduction of a unique learner number across all levels of education to track learners and share access data. I'll repeat that. The original Commission, almost a decade ago, recommended this. In his 2024 annual report, the current Commissioner also recommended that each student have a unique learner number to help monitor progress on widening access. Robert Gordon University and Universities Scotland indicated their and the sector's strong support for the use of a unique learner number, stating that it would allow for an understanding of where a person has been in their educational journey and identified their needs. The committee strongly agreed with the value of introducing a unique learner number to track students' educational journey and allow a better understanding of what works regarding transitions in the longer term. I'll give way.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to Douglas Ross for taking the intervention. I have heard it described as a bureaucratic nicety. Does he agree with me? It is far, far from that, but is actually a fundamental cornerstone in the data retention and understanding of what's happening in our schools.
Douglas Ross.
I absolutely agree with Martin Whitfield on that, as does almost everyone who came to our committee. There was almost unanimous support. And I repeat again, not just in the few weeks where we took evidence, not just in the written submissions, but going back year after year to the very first report from the first Commissioner in 2016. So why are we still here now in 2025 at the end of the year still calling for this? The committee was extremely disappointed in the apparent lack of progress in relation to the introduction of a unique learner number, and that the Scottish Government has said it will not be introduced in the short term or even the medium term, despite this being recommended by the Commission almost a decade ago. I have to say the committee was also disappointed that the Scottish Government was unable to provide any indicative costs for introducing a unique learner number, or even to confirm whether legislation would be required. I remember it was the current Minister's predecessor But he sat down at committee, having told us he'd viewed all the other evidence where unique learner number came up time and time again. There were questions, would this need legislation or not, and how much it would cost. When they were put to the Minister, he had no idea. I felt that was disrespectful to the committee for a Minister not coming prepared for an issue that was clearly going to come up. And our report, which was unanimously agreed by every party in this Parliament, I have to stress that there was no dissent on this report as a whole or our recommendation on a unique learner number, but we recommended that the Scottish Government now commits to the introduction of a unique learner number and outlines how this will be achieved. Sadly, in its response, the Scottish Government said it recognised the potential long-term benefits of a unique learner number, but stated it's a wide-ranging issue that requires careful consideration because it's complex, inherently cross-cutting in nature and potentially involves sharing the personal sensitive data of millions of individuals. But we all know that. We know the challenges. We just want a solution. The only people that are stopping this are the Scottish Government. And I was encouraged that government members on the backbenches supported this recommendation, and I do hope the new Minister and the Government listen to not just opposition politicians, not just the committee, but the unanimous view of parties on our committee that this is needed. There's a number of other issues that I want to focus on. We looked at the measures, looking at the eligibility for and the progress on widening access initiatives. And currently, obviously, we use the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. But during the inquiry, the committee heard about the limitations of this measure to identify all those students who may need support. While valuable and helpful at a national level, SIMD is an area-based measure which does not capture individual circumstances, for example, someone living in poverty but within an otherwise affluent area. Although the Commissioner for Fair Access highlighted the continued need for a central measure of progress, he and many other witnesses advocated using a basket of indicators, including free school meals data, to help identify individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. The committee noted the usefulness of using SIMD as a widening access measure, but also recognised its limitations, particularly in relation to rural areas. And we therefore recommended that the Scottish Government works with stakeholders and the Commissioner to introduce a basket of measures to identify person-centred characteristics for widening access measures. I also want to look at free school meals data. The committee heard about the ongoing work in relation to a pilot scheme in the North East using free school meals data in addition to SIMD as a means of identifying students eligible for widening access measures. In a submission to the committee, Robert Gordon University stated that a lack of legislation has made implementing data sharing arrangements difficult. While appreciating that there are potential barriers in relation to data sharing more widely, we urged the Scottish Government to look into the challenges and to confirm whether legislation was required to address these. The committee subsequently urged the Scottish Government to find a vehicle to allow for the necessary statutory measures, and we therefore welcome the Minister's amendment at stage 2 of the Tertiary Education and Training Bill, which seeks to address these barriers. And we do welcome that. It was an issue we raised in our report, and very quickly the Government and the Minister found a solution for that. There are a number of other points that I'm sure committee members and others will raise. One I want to finish on, Presiding Officer, is colleges. It's important to recognise the crucial role that colleges play in widening access for students from SIMD 20 backgrounds, disabled students, care experienced students, BME students and adult learners to university via articulation. However, the committee also recognises the importance of college education in its own right. During this parliamentary session, the committee has conducted an inquiry on colleges and in recent years has focused much of its pre-budget scrutiny on the sector. For a number of years, our committee has expressed concern regarding the financial sustainability of Scotland's colleges and has made numerous recommendations to the Scottish Government on how these financial challenges should be addressed. I have to say the committee is frustrated at the lack of change or urgency to make change for the sector that has seen and shares the concerns that colleges are facing up and down the country, and the very serious and significant risk of the financial future of some of our colleges. Given the importance to widening access agenda, the loss of colleges would not only impact the communities that they serve, but would also undermine the drive to widen access to opportunities, including degree-level study nationally. Presiding Officer, I'm grateful for the time in the Chamber today for our committee report to be fully debated and discussed. I look forward to hearing from committee colleagues and other members during the debate this afternoon, and hearing from the Minister about the measures the Scottish Government can take to ensure access to education and institutions is widened. I commend our report, and again I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much, Mr Ross. Just to advise the Chamber, we've got a little bit of time in hand, therefore any interventions, certainly members will get the time back. I now call on Ben Macpherson. Minister, around 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you also to the convener and members of the committee for the work that they did, and all the stakeholders who gave evidence to the committee, and the fact that this has enabled us to have this debate today, and all the clerks involved in that process too. I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss the committee's report and the government's formal response to it earlier in the year. And I'm grateful for this opportunity as somebody committed in my politics to creating a fairer society, as so many colleagues are across the Chamber, and the important role that widening access to higher education and other opportunities plays in that process, a really important role. This should be one of our top priorities in the period ahead, along with creating greater parity of esteem, which I know also motivates so many colleagues across the Chamber and others across the country. And those two aspects in particular will help us establish a better scenario than we are now, although we've made much progress, to creating a more equitable post-school education system. The convener set out, and the report sets out, the challenges that still remain. But I just want to state, first of all, some of the progress that has been made, because I think it's important to acknowledge the advances that collectively have been achieved and that the government has been seeking and aiming to provide leadership on. For example, as we speak here today and in recent years, the number of Scots from more deprived areas entering university in 23-24 on full-time first-degree courses is up 37% since this government established the Commission on Widening Access. The proportion of Scottish domiciled entrants with a known disability from the 20% most deprived areas has risen from 12.8% in 2016-17 to 18.1% in 23-24. More progress to make, certainly.
Duncan Glancy.
I thank the Minister for taking the intervention, and I welcome that progress. Can the Minister set out when he will be in a position to respond to the consultation on student support for disabled students and part-time students?
Minister.
I'll be happy to update the member on that in due course. I'm not able to provide an answer to that at this juncture, but I thank her for raising that, and certainly appreciate the importance of that as she does, and we'll get back to her on that in due course. As I was saying, there's been progress, but there's more to do. The share of black and minority ethnic Scottish domiciled entrants from the 20% most deprived areas entering Scottish universities has grown from 24.2% in 2016-17 to 28% in 23-24. Now, the convener and the report emphasised the need for further progress, but we have to acknowledge the difference that's been made as well. And in that, we all think of in those broader percentages, in that wider summary in terms of the national picture. Of course, there are many, many individuals, and we all will have met them in our constituency capacities. The people who've managed to go to university, often through college, has been emphasised, who might not have thought about it before, and the difference that they're now making, whether that's in certain professions or in growing sectors in our economy. And those stories are important because they help amplify the necessity to make sure that people are aware of the opportunities that are there for them in their communities. Yep.
Willie Rennie.
And he's right to point out some of the progress, there's no doubt about that. But we're here to try and make things better. So he's 4 minutes into his 8-minute speech. I want to really understand why he thinks the progress has stalled and whether he thinks the flatlining of closing the poverty-related attainment gap in schools has contributed towards that flatlining at universities.
Minister.
Well, I appreciate the member probing me on these points, but I think I would say that one of the key bits of progress we made was actually yesterday in terms of the action that's been taken in the TEP bill in order to make sure that we're better data sharing, because one of the, as he knows, the key interventions that the government has made in recent years in terms of reducing poverty that has had significant impact across nearly all of Scotland on the cost of living and therefore on the poverty-related attainment gap in an indirect and also in certain circumstances direct way is the Scottish Child Payment. And the action that we took yesterday will help with data sharing across different organisations so that we have a better understanding beyond SMID of where people need further assistance. Yes? Okay.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to Ben Macpherson for taking the intervention. And isn't that the answer to the convener's question about the unique learning number? If we can do it in a relatively, sadly, large group of people that can be very, very specifically identified, why can't we do it in a slightly larger group of young people?
Minister.
I appreciate the points that have been made about the unique learner number, both by the member there and also by the convener in his opening remarks and in the report as well. And as has been emphasised by other ministers, this is not a simple issue, and there needs to be consideration about the fact that it goes beyond just widening access to higher education and between different organisations. However, I'm happy to give an undertaking to look at this from a fresh perspective as a new minister. I think these complexities should not be a barrier if there is merit in trying to advance this, which the committee has obviously emphasised, and I'm happy to look at it and see what progress can be made in the period ahead. They've got two people on their feet. Who wants to? Brian Whittle? Brian Whittle.
I'm very grateful for the Minister for taking so many interventions. I think I'm slightly concerned with the Government's reticence across a lot of portfolios to implement AI and tech. I mean, what we're talking about here in terms of the unique education number, a unique learning number, is hardly very different from a KI number in healthcare. What is the resistance to that?
Minister.
So, in all government considerations around systems and data sharing, and this Parliament, even in my time here, has had many debates on these points, whether it be in social security or in considerations around named person, for example. We've had many debates, and what we need to be very clear about whenever there's any data sharing is, of course, that is done in a safe and secure way, and that the systems are efficient and optimal in terms of making sure that it cuts across and that there is good value for money for the taxpayer. Now, I appreciate obviously in the health system there is an identification number for patients. In the tax system there is a specific tax code for individuals. But as has been emphasised by previous ministers, when it comes to this issue, of course there is a consideration across different entities, including, for example, independent bodies like universities. So it is more complicated. And we need to make sure that we're considerate of costs. I'm conscious of time, Presiding Officer. There's a lot more that the report covers, and I'm looking forward to listening to what colleagues have said. We of course, are aiming towards a situation where each university will be expected to match or exceed its highest proportion of entrants from the 20% most deprived areas to date. And we recognise, as I said, there's more work to do, and we continue to work with the Scottish Funding Council on this. This really matters not just for social justice, but making sure that we are maximising the human potential in our communities and Our people are, of course, our biggest resource as a country. So widening access matters. We've made significant progress. The committee's work on this is important. The recommendations are helpful, and I look forward to working across the chamber on those and hearing contributions today.
Thank you very much, Minister. I now call Miles Briggs, again, around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also start by thanking all those who gave evidence to the committee and all the organisations which have provided really helpful briefings ahead of today's debate, which in 7 minutes I won't be able to touch upon all the work which they highlighted. But I do think there's a lot of helpful content which was given to all of us around the work our institutions are trying to undertake to make sure that they, both in colleges and universities, are trying to make sure that we do close that gap and actually give the opportunity for people to get into education. And I wanted to start by highlighting something I agree with Keir Starmer, which I didn't think I would necessarily say, which he said at the Labour Party conference, and I wasn't there, Mr Whitfield, but I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister made a challenge to make vocational options as attractive to parents, and we must remember that, and young people as higher education. And I think that's something we are lacking in a lot of our debate here in the Scottish Parliament. And as I've stated in almost every education debate, we on these benches want to see real reform to provide more opportunities for our young people and Scots to retrain, and opportunities like the one I saw on Friday when I visited Liberton High School with my Lothian colleague Sue Webber, and I know Daniel Johnson was there just a few weeks previously. But the school has partnered with Tigers Construction Academy to offer young people in this part of the city a foundation apprenticeship in construction skills, to give them a taste of a career on offer in the construction industry. And listening to those young people on Friday, it was just really positive to hear how this opportunity is not only helping to provide the practical sessions, but also focusing their learning on other subjects and the theoretical importance of maths, for example, in work and jobs, and planting the seed in a lot of these young people's heads of a future career ladder and pathways beyond that into higher and further education. Yes, I will. Yep.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful to Miles Briggs for going down this path, shocked as I am that he's quoting Keir Starmer. And the reason that I'm grateful that he is going down this pathway is because one of the long-standing concerns I've had, and I wonder if he shares this, is the quality of the career advice and direction available to our young people. Most of our young people are lucky to get a few minutes in their entire secondary school experience with a career advisor, and the range of possibilities that exist for them is not always very clear to them, and hence often they get grouped together and almost predestined, in a predestined sort of a way. They end up in a certain place that they didn't actually choose to be.
Miles Briggs, I'll give you the time back.
I absolutely agree with that point, and I think that's where a new vision for how that's delivered, and actually extra curricular work outside of school for different organisations to provide that opportunity and give our young people ambition for what's out there as well. And I recently did a visit with my colleague Sharon Dowry to the Ayr campus of the University of West of Scotland. They were doing a lot of that work to actually look towards where school and university is blending that learning. And I was hugely impressed by the work the university's developed in its portfolio of work-based learning and graduate apprenticeship models. And these routes offer that alternative pathway into degree-level study for individuals who are employed and wish to go straight into work. And that's where most young people are telling us. They want to be able to have work-based learning, and we need to make sure the systems we put in place and are publicly funding match that really positive outlook for them as well. Now, when this Parliament was first reconvened, ministers used to speak about the aspirations of lifelong learning and the ability of Scots to have access to continuous development of skills and knowledge throughout a learner's life. For many people, that is just not the case, and we don't really talk about lifelong learning as a Parliament any longer. But I would not acknowledge the Open University's briefing, which did state that the university has 16,470 students across Scotland, 71% of which are already in employment, demonstrating the alignment we need to see between the provision of education and workforce development, working alongside employers to make sure we achieve that as well. Yes.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful for Miles Briggs to take the intervention. And isn't it the right that that loss of lifelong learning just happened to coincide when part-time courses at colleges vanished in Scotland?
Miles Briggs.
It's a fact that we've lost over 100,000 of these courses in our college sector, and that has had huge impacts on every part of our society. We should acknowledge that. I'd also like to highlight the work of Robert Gordon University as well, which was provided to us, and I'll declare an interest as a graduate of RGU. I loved my time studying in Aberdeen, and one of the reasons I chose to study at Robert Gordon's was the fact that it had such a great reputation around graduate employment. The university has had graduate employability at the heart of its approach to education, working closely with industry in the North East, the fishing industry included, to ensure that knowledge and experience allows students to access these career pathways throughout its courses. And there's a wide range of not only compulsory but optional placements to actually implant people into work. And as a model, I think that is something I have always advocated for. It's one which last year resulted in RGU graduate employability rate standing at 96.5%. That was ranked the second in the UK in graduate employment. And that's something I think we need to really look towards, not just the pathways of education, but the pathways into employment and the opportunities which are across Scotland at the moment in so many key and really important sectors. And the evidence which I think has been provided, and the convener of the committee touched upon this, and I think it's worth putting on the record that the targets which were set for Robert Gordon's were unable to be met, and that is more down to the fact that we're judging them on SIM D20. The fact that they made 7.2% of full-time degree entrants is incredibly welcome, but they do not have enough postcodes in the North East to meet that target, and I think ministers and the wider Parliament have to acknowledge that as well, and we'll maybe hear more from North East members on that point. Now, the progress being made to support care experienced young people, I think, is important, and it's a piece of work we'll be returning to in the new year as a committee with the care experience bill coming through Parliament as well. But there needs to be, in some of the private sessions which we held as a committee, I think were actually some of the most important ones for me anyway, to hear around these young people's concerns and the evidence they gave us, that yes, there has been a lot of success into getting them into further and higher education, but sustaining them in that has not been measured or looked at tracking. And I think that's something I hope this debate really recognises. We shouldn't take success of just getting a young person into an institution. We need to get them at the end of that institution, and that's not being tracked, and we need to be honest about that. And I hope ministers will take on board the committee recommendations and findings around that. To conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, I am concerned that our college sector has become the Cinderella of our education system. In recent years, we have seen significant cuts to that sector. Colleges Scotland's submission called for a greater focus to be placed on funding of part-time provision, and this would bring benefits to adult learners and those seeking to develop their skills and employment. And Scottish Conservatives have outlined our vision to reform and increase the number of apprenticeships and support our college sector. But I think it is important that the budget coming in January, we do see, and it will be a key test for ministers, whether or not there is a commitment or not to our college sector. So to conclude, widening access to higher education must be about real opportunity. For many of our talented young people in Scotland, they are still being held back by background, postcode and circumstance. In order to change this, Scotland needs our colleges and universities to properly support and deliver a fair access, clear pathways, not only into study but into work, and that together they can help achieve the potential of our young people in the future years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Briggs. And I call Pam Duncan-Glancy, around 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'd like to start by thanking my colleagues on the committee, the clerks who supported us, and all of those who gave evidence to this important inquiry. Presiding Officer, widening access to education is crucial if we are to open opportunities for everyone in Scotland to live up to their potential. That's why this inquiry was so important. It's not just about a theoretical policy intent. This is about lives, and it's about changing them. For that to happen, we need a tertiary education system that is match fit. And sadly, in Scotland, we face significant challenges. Whilst universities and colleges are working their socks off to support all who have the grades to get there, they are doing this against a tide of cuts and a lack of priority for that work from their government. The Scottish Government's own Equality and Fairer Scotland statement accompanying the 24-25 budget said, "There is a significant risk that the reduction in the HE resource budget will increase competition for remaining university places, which could disadvantage learners from socio-economically disadvantaged areas with lower prior attainment." And, Presiding Officer, according to what we heard in committee, that is sadly the case. Progress towards the next target, 18% of entrants from the most deprived areas to get to university by 2026, has stalled. Data shows that fewer people from disadvantaged backgrounds had applications accepted in 2023 than in 2022. 2026 is when the target is to be met. It's right around the corner, and this target, as acknowledged by the committee's work, is unlikely to be met. In missing it, though, it's not just about numbers. Our constituents are losing out on lives and opportunities and their future. Presiding Officer, the committee also looked at other factors, of course, than socio-economic factors that can lock people out of opportunity. And what we found was that many are interlinked. We heard of the significant barriers that disabled students and care leavers face. Disabled students are still not getting the support they need to access the same opportunities as their non-disabled peers, particularly visually impaired students, and we had some seriously compelling evidence on that. Evidence I would ask the Minister to carefully consider. And as a former disabled student myself, I know that this fact will be at least intensely disappointing to disabled students, and at worst, the difference between being able to go to university or not. That the findings from the last review of disabled student support, completed years ago, have not been actioned is not just a failure of responsibility from the Government. It's having a real-life impact on students in Scotland and their ability to get into higher education and indeed to stay there. It's leaving lives on hold. For that reason, I pressed the Government during the inquiry to secure a commitment from the Scottish Government to review again the support that is available for disabled students. I asked that they build on the previous review so that they didn't put student support services in colleges and universities under further pressure to repeat themselves, or indeed students to repeat themselves. But I asked that this review be picked up and the actions build on the recommendations from the last one. And that is an issue that, of course, the Minister hasn't been able to update today. I'd like to think that he could in due course, because this is a serious issue that is locking many people out of further and higher education. Part-time students were also included in the committee, in the government review. And that's something that the committee and my party hugely welcome, because the needs of part-time students must be addressed, especially because we know that the trend is toward more flexible study options, like those offered by the Open University, for example. And the review, I understand, although it's now concluded, was to look at the impact on part-time students and the support for part-time students. And again, I'd welcome an update sooner rather than later from the Government on this. Presiding Officer, amidst a challenging environment, our universities in Scotland are doing incredible work, as are our colleges, to widen access. And I thank all organisations who sent briefings ahead of today on the work that they're doing in this area. 71% of Open University students in Scotland, 73% in Glasgow are in employment, with 30% of students sharing that they have a disability. 32% of the University of West of Scotland students are from SIMD 1 areas, being ranked as the best at widening access in Scotland for 11 years in a row. And Robert Gordon University, as we've heard already, is doing a great deal of work, including their Northern Lights initiative and working with colleges to open up access to their courses. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to all universities and colleges across Scotland today. Scottish Labour and I will always be on your side. Finally, Presiding Officer, I'd like to speak about what a widening access agenda seeks to deliver, because it can't just be about getting into university or college. It has to be about staying there, graduating and then getting a good job. That's why the wider context matters too, because as NUS in Scotland has said, education might, rightly and we agree, be free, but studying and delivering it is not. Experts across Scotland told committee that Scottish tertiary education is in crisis. Over the last decade, we've seen higher education funding plummet by 20% in real terms per student. And in further education, Audit Scotland reported that Scottish Government funding for colleges fell by 20% in the last 5 years. This is having real-life impact on the life chances of the students furthest from access to education. And of course, the Institute for Fiscal Studies set out in 2023 that the cost of living support that students can access in Scotland has become less generous over time, with the total support for the poorest students having been cut by 16% in real terms since 2013-14. So while students have been able to borrow more per year towards living costs in Scotland, in an absence of more maintenance support, this leaves poorer students with more debt, with the average debt standing at £17,990 in 2023-24, compared to only £6,090 when the SNP pledged to scrap debt in 2007. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, rhetoric on widening access rings hollow if people can't stay on and get on. It rings hollow if the very institutions we need to deliver it are not a priority for their government. And it rings hollow if the significant challenges that students, including disabled students and care leavers, face go unaddressed any longer. There is a way to go before the class, glass and step ceiling in the way of opportunity in education in Scotland is gone. This government's had 18 years and still too many are locked out. And I fundamentally believe that in May the public will see that and will not afford them more time to make the same mistakes again. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Maggie Chapman, around 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank the committee, clerks and all who gave evidence for this inquiry, because this report matters. Free, universal and equitable access to higher education is not just an aspiration, it is a cornerstone of a fair, compassionate and confident Scotland. It's about our culture, our well-being, our democracy, our shared future. I am proud that Scotland chose to abolish tuition fees for some students. We rejected the corrosive market logic that sees education, something that should nourish human potential, as a commodity to be bought and sold. But we must confront a hard truth. For too many people, the right, not a privilege, to higher education remains a dream unrealised. The Scottish Government aims for 20% of full-time first-degree entrants to be from the 20% most deprived backgrounds. We are, as we've heard, now at 16%, with 5 years to go. Progress has stalled, and without renewed action, without political courage, we will miss that target. And that figure hides further injustice. Disabled students may now be proportionately represented, but the committee heard that this masks significant persistent barriers, assessment delays, inaccessible learning environments, and a review of support that took 4 years to deliver and is already out of date. That is indefensible. Disabled students deserve to be welcomed, supported and valued, not left in limbo. And it's not just disabled students left out in the cold. So we must do better and do it systematically, not superficially. That means widening access not only through traditional routes, but through flexible pathways that respect people's lives and communities. Robert Gordon University already has spoken about this afternoon, one of our most committed widening access institutions in a region where structural barriers are very real, has valuable experience to share. RGU, like the University of Aberdeen and North East Scotland College, faces a distinctive challenge. The City and Shire have very few SIMD 20 postcodes. Only 8 or 9% of households in the City, 3 or 4% in the Shire, fall into that category. Yet 3 major tertiary institutions draw from that small pool. So RGU's SIMD 20 entrant figure of 7.2% reflects demography, not lack of commitment. And RGU has responded, not by shrugging and giving up, but by building one of Scotland's most sustained, evidence-based approaches to widening access. Their Schools Hub model embeds staff in all 28 secondary schools across the City and Shire, fortnightly or monthly, building long-term relationships with pupils, teachers and careers advisors. Their Access To programme has grown from 70 pupils in 2019 to over 1,000 this year, offering 11 subject-specific courses with free transport and food to remove hidden costs that so often quietly lock out too many young people. And their Northern Lights programme reaches S1 and S2 pupils, providing early, imaginative interventions that genuinely widen horizons. These are the kind of interventions that we should celebrate, embedded in communities, grounded in relationships and tailored to need. And they only work because academic and support staff give their time and share their expertise and enthusiasm, often in the evenings, and I'm grateful to them for this. RGU's experience also reminds us that widening access is about so much more than SIND. It is about understanding disadvantage in all its forms. The free school meal pilot shows the value of individual level data, capturing individual disadvantage far better than any postcode data can. It also shows the data sharing barriers that hold us back that we urgently need to address. The same is true of rurality. SIND is simply too blunt to capture rural disadvantage. University participation is lower in remote communities, and Greens believe that opportunity should never depend on geography, so we need to look beyond SIND. As we've heard already, widening access has to be about retention and success. Getting students in is not enough. Keeping them, supporting them to flourish is what real fairness looks like. Today, 12% of students do not progress to Year 2, and the rate is worse for disadvantaged learners. As someone who has spent years working in universities, and I refer colleagues to my register of interests as Rector of the University of Dundee, I know where the gaps are. Staff are expected to support students with little or no information about who has come through different routes or who faces particular barriers. They're left to guess or to ask students to disclose personal information again and again. That's not dignified, it's not effective, and it's not fair. We must act on the committee's call for a unique learner number, recommended a decade ago. RGU is right. This would transform our ability to understand learner journeys, evaluate what works, and intervene early. And of course, widening access also means facing the financial realities students deal with. Tuition may be free for some, but rent, food, transport, books, equipment are not. Private developers are extracting millions from students who simply need somewhere safe and affordable to live. When government removed student rent controls from the housing bill, it moved one of the most effective tools we could have had to tackle the biggest financial barriers students face. Students deserve protection from predatory landlords just as much as any other tenant. And finally, we must not forget postgraduate study. Access cannot end at undergraduate level if employers increasingly expect master's degrees and more. Education should not be for sale at any level. Presiding Officer, widening access is a moral imperative. It's about dignity, justice, and the belief that every person deserves the chance to discover their potential. The committee's report challenges us to do better. Institutions like RGU show us what is possible. Let us honour both by committing to systemic change that puts compassion, equality and human flourishing at the heart of Scotland's higher education system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. And I call Willie Rennie, around 6 minutes. Mr Rennie.
I want to thank the clerks and the witnesses who gave evidence to the committee, to my fellow committee members. But I can honestly say there was universal delight at Herald Politician of the Year awards when our convener managed to climb that heady heights of achieving the committee convener of the year. I can say it was universal. Even George Adam was delighted with the achievement of our convener. It brought the committee together in a way that I've never seen before. I'll take an intervention.
George Adam.
For the sake of clarity, I wasn't quite as excited about it as yourself, Mr Rennie.
Willie Rennie.
Now, there are two very important universities that have been in my life. The first is what I called Paisley Tech when I was there back in the 80s, now the University of the West of Scotland, and now the University of St Andrews. And both have achieved quite remarkable things and progress with widening access. The University of the West of Scotland, which Mr Adam knows very well, have got a fantastic foundation academy that reaches out to 34 schools through a range of councils, I think 10 councils in total. They've enrolled 3,500 pupils at no cost to those schools and to those councils. It's been an introduction for those young people to university through a 10-week module in the school, not in the university, in the school, run by lecturers and staff from that institution. And on completion of the academy, you can get SCQF credits. And it's been so successful that the Times Higher Education Supplement gave it the Widening Participation Initiative Award in 2024. They've done that by themselves, with no extra money from the government, and they've made significant progress. And then University of St Andrews, a place you would never expect to be treating widening access as a top priority, but it has. Contextual admissions, the Gateway programme, which I've seen for myself, providing a tailored first-year course from those from SIMD 20 backgrounds, but also a bridging year course as well, which helps them get into that university in itself. Scholarships, outreach, they go to almost every school that asks across this country, but also they are providing a particular course for Fifers. The First Chances Fife goes right in to many communities across Fife, some of the poorest communities in Cowdenbeath, in Lochgelly, in Leavenmouth. They reach out into those communities. And they've also provided mentoring. And you can notice the difference. When I go around the streets of St Andrews now, the accents are different. It's not all just Americans and people from England or people from other parts of the world. There's Glaswegians. There's even Fifers that are in the university now. They've made tremendous progress. Now, both of those have risen to the challenge that the government set them. And I think, to be fair to the government, they did set that challenge, and the universities have responded positively to that challenge. And it shows what can be done if you set quite tough targets. But we've not met those targets. And we need to therefore look again at why the progress that has been made by those institutions has stalled. And I think there's two things that we should look at. The first is the widening access through schools, the poverty-related attainment gap, which we have to acknowledge has not worked. It's 10 years in now, it's supposed to have closed by next year, and we're nowhere near it. There is some infinitesimal improvement within primary schools, but secondary schools, it's pretty well flatlined. So we've not made progress on that, and therefore the students that are going off to universities, therefore, are the ones that we're trying to access into those courses. But then secondly, and we take great pride in Scotland in the college route being a unique route into higher education, doing the NC, the HNC, working up to degree level, and the articulation, the smooth pathway into universities. And although the numbers that are, or the percentages that are coming through that route has increased, we've made progress in recent years, the actual numbers has fallen, which is an indication of what Miles Briggs was talking about, which is actually colleges have shrunk. We don't have as many going into colleges, therefore we don't have as many accessing that unique route into higher education. And that brings us to the next point, which is, I just wish the government would just be honest with us why they've not made progress on the unique learner number, because we should just have an open debate about the challenges, because sometimes these things are hard to do. But the government aren't being honest, and you just get the impression they're not that interested in doing it. So they should just be honest. If they don't want to do it, tell us, and tell us why they're not going to do it, and tell us what they're going to do instead. Because there are means to do this. I mean, we have, for years, we were trying to get into the nursery sector. The 2-year-olds from disadvantaged backgrounds, the numbers were pathetic. And the government went to the DWP to access particular records in order to make sure that they got in, and they made progress. And we've actually managed to get the numbers up, not as much as I would like, but it can be done. So I don't quite know why the government's holding back on this. If it's not a priority, just be honest with us. But to be fair to the government, progress has been made, but it has flatlined. And therefore, we should re-examine our priorities and to make sure, because this is about getting those from disadvantaged backgrounds ultimately into the workplace. And we know that economic inactivity levels in Scotland are shocking. This is part of the solution. We need to make sure everybody's got the opportunity to get a good job. And I hope the Minister, in his summing up, will be more substantive in dealing with the challenges that we face, so at last we can make some progress.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. And we move to the open debate. I call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you very much, President Officer. I'm very grateful for the chance to take part in today's debate. I'm obviously not a member of the committee, but I'm very grateful to the Education Committee for the work they've undertaken in this area. I think this is an important area to look at and to scrutinise, and they have published a very comprehensive report, a very good piece of work indeed. Ensuring that we widen and expand access to higher education is, I think, of the utmost importance. It speaks to creating a fairer society and ensuring that we have a more inclusive economy. And Pam Duncan-Glancy used the word potential. If we're going to make sure that every person in our society has the opportunity to reach their full potential, then ensuring we have greater equity of access to higher education, I think, is an essential part of the equation. I was able to experience and enjoy higher education when I was younger. I wasn't quite as adventurous as Miles Briggs, who decided to I think Miles Briggs grew up in Perthshire, if I remember correctly, so he made the journey up the road to Robert Gordon University. I grew up in Glasgow and went to the University of Glasgow, as many other members in this place also did. And I had the time of my life there, and it set a great foundation for the life I have lived. And ensuring that more people from a greater range of backgrounds are able to have that life-changing experience is something that is important to me. I do think free education is not the only part of that, but it is part of the equation. By no means of imagination would I say I came from the circumstances of deprived background. But if tuition fees had been in place at the time I was studying, it would have given me at least pause for thought as to whether or not it was a course that I wanted to take. And I certainly know from interacting with people in the area I represent that it would do the same for many young people now. Having benefited from free education, then I think it's essential that, and I'm very proud to have supported its reintroduction for Scottish higher education as a member of this place. Widening access is an important area of activity. It was an important area of activity over a long period of time when I was the Minister with responsibility for higher education and further education. I was pleased to see the progress that has been made. I was able to be involved in the appointment of John McKendrick as the Commissioner for Fair Access, taking over from Peter Scott, who did a fantastic job in setting up the activity and taking forward the widening access activity. And I know John McKendrick is continuing that activity, and I thank them both for the work they've done. I'll give way to Mr Rennie.
I can attest that John McKendrick is a good addition to the team. But can he tell us why he didn't progress the unique learner number? What was his insight into this issue?
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, I think I need to leave my deep and dark secrets when I was in Ministry office, beyond being able to stand up and say I appointed John McKendrick as the Commissioner for Fair Access. So I can't say too much about it, but I do know it is an issue that has been considered. There are inevitably going to be complexities in taking it forward. I think there is some merit in the case and in the argument. I can understand the rationale for it, and perhaps the Minister will be able to say more about the Government's current position. We should reflect that there has been progress. I know Mr Rennie has talked about progress stalling, but if you actually look at the figure as existed when we began this journey, we have made significant progress. And yes, there's been a bit of a bump from 2021 to 22, but the most recent figures show that we're moving in the right direction again. Briefly.
Stephen Kerr.
Briefly, Jimmy Hepburn will remember that when he was Minister, he and I exchanged words in the committee about data, the paucity of data, the fact that we really couldn't tell how many had commenced versus how many had completed a course, for example. And that's still the situation we have now, some years after Jamie Hepburn was the Minister. What exactly is his analysis, having been a former Minister now? What is his analysis of why this information is so hard to collect?
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, first of all, I think the member, with great respect, is misremembering. I was only ever before his committee on one occasion when I was in Minister. Such was the great job I was doing that he only required me to turn up to his committee once, and it wasn't to discuss that matter. I mean, there are inevitably complexities in drawing down data because it exists across a range of different sources, and sometimes it's about trying to pull that together. I absolutely agree that we should be doing everything we can to do in that regard, but there can be challenges involved. Let me, I see I don't have much time left, Presiding Officer, but I do want to commend the contribution of colleges. Colleges are making a fantastic contribution to this endeavour. I do think it is important, as the Commissioner said to the committee, that we don't just view colleges as the pipeline to universities. They do important activity in of their own right, but they are an important pathway into higher education, into the university sector. And I was very pleased to see the committee highlight an example that exists in my own constituency through the innovative partnership working between New College Lanarkshire and the University of West of Scotland. And I would reflect, I think it is important to reflect, yes, as much as we're seeing the progress, we know it's uneven, we know that some institutions need to go further than others. The University of West of Scotland in particular has to be commended for the activity it's undertaken. A lot of the newer institutions are doing some of the heavier lifting in this regard, some of the, notwithstanding the fine work being done by St Andrews University, as mentioned by Mr Rennill. I wasn't quite entirely clear if he was really welcoming Glaswegians into the town of St Andrews, but we can maybe discuss that later. But we know there is more to be done. We know that this is a journey that has to be continued to be taken forward. I know that the government's committed to this, and I very much look forward to hearing from the Minister at the end of the debate to see how we're going to hit that target come 2030.
Thank you, Mr Hepburn. I call Brian Whittle to be followed by George Adam.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking the Education and Skills Committee for the comprehensive report on accessing further education and for the opportunity to highlight the importance that a great education brings and how important that is accessible to all. And I have to say, listening to my colleague previous, I'm also a product of Glasgow University. I've also been through college. I've also been through Open University as well. So many people have tried to educate me, Presiding Officer, and yet I still stand here. What we need is a further education sector that offers equity of access for pupils with a passion and a drive to succeed in their chosen field of study. We need an education system that speaks to an economic need, both locally and more generally across Scotland, that matches that need with careers advice and a straightforward pathway into that career. I have to say what the Scottish Government have presided over, I think, is far removed from that ideal. It seems to me that if you're academically minded, you do well in an exam environment, there is a route through school and into university. The Scottish Government, I think, as we've heard, are always keen to push the increase in university attendance, especially in the lower SIMD areas. And of course, equity of access across all demographics is an extremely important goal that I'm sure we all share. But surely it's not just about attending university. It's about appropriate education that leads to a fulfilling and engaging career, especially highlighting where local opportunities are available. Now, I read a recent report by the CIPD which is entitled "What is the Scale and the Impact of Graduate Overqualification in Scotland?" And it suggested that over a third of graduates feel overqualified for their jobs and are more likely to be underemployed, underpaid or working part-time than graduates whose jobs match their qualifications. Now, we read through the recommendations, and a couple of them are to follow. Firstly, they recommend that we provide better careers advice, as we've already heard from Miles Briggs, and that guidance to help young people understand alternative vocational pathways. They want to expand Scotland's existing modern foundation and graduate apprenticeships to encourage vocational pathways and work-based learning. Presiding Officer, expanding access to higher education must start at primary and secondary school with careers advice that speaks to and highlights opportunity. University is entirely the right place for some pupils, but in recent times, pushing young people down the university route seems to be the measurement of success to the detriment of our colleges. The Scottish Government have continued to erode the FE sector with tens of thousands of places cut in recent years. So if we're going to start discussing need, let's talk about healthcare. Only yesterday in the social care debate, I highlighted that Ayrshire College had to turn away 71 applications to social care courses purely on funding grounds. Now, that issue was echoed from colleagues across the chamber from their areas, and we all know how short of care workers the system is. It is described as a crisis, and yet we're turning away those who would work in that sector. The Scottish Government are still sticking to the line that immigration is the only solution. That is lazy politics, and I think it's an abdication of responsibility. I'll give way.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the member for taking that intervention, and I'm enjoying the contribution he's making about the concerns around the number of people who are being turned away from colleges. Would he agree with me that it is also a tragedy that 1,200 students applied for places in Kelvin College and there were only 300 places available to allocate?
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank Pam Duncan-Glassie for that intervention, because the same intervention was made yesterday, and as I referenced there, I was talking about Ayrshire College, and other colleagues from across the chamber described exactly the same problem. All those students who want to get into a place, who want to apply for a career, who want to get into areas that we are crying out for places, and yet they're being turned away. Another example is we're short of doctors, and yet we have applications from Scottish pupils being turned away, even though they have the qualifications to get on the course, because there is an artificial cap put in place by the Scottish Government. There is an obvious solution: shift the cap. And I don't understand why the Scottish Government won't instruct the obvious. We're short of nurses and midwives, so let's make it easier for pupils to apply. From some potential nurses and midwives, an apprenticeship route would be more appropriate, especially for those looking to upskill from a healthcare environment. Over a third of trainee midwives are over the age of 30, meaning many of them will have to give up careers or already have children or have mortgages and so on. Currently, they would have to leave work to go for a university place. Surely that is a barrier easily removed with an apprenticeship pathway, and I'll give way to the Minister.
Minister.
I'm grateful to Brian Whittle for taking the intervention and agree with his overall sentiment about how we need to create greater parity of esteem and different pathways into different professions and careers. Therefore, would he agree with me that the piece of primary legislation before Parliament is so important in that regard, in terms of bringing the funding together for universities, colleges and apprenticeships, so that we can be creative and agile in the offer that we make to people, and also achieve greater efficiency and value for money for the taxpayer in that regard?
Brian Whittle.
I appreciate the Minister's intervention, but the committee couldn't even commit to that. I think it's extraordinarily expensive, and the only thing that matters, Minister, is outcome. It's outcomes. And as I said previously, in the healthcare, what I would describe there are obvious steps that I would describe as widening access to education and delivering against a really urgent need. And while we're on the subject of apprenticeships, I want to once again raise the issue we face in engineering and trades, that chronic lack of people, against a backdrop in Ayrshire and across Scotland of a demand for apprenticeships in engineering and trades, leading to very highly skilled and well-paid jobs. Ayrshire turned away 400 applications for engineering apprenticeships because of lack of funding. They turned away 120 trade applications at the college. And imagine if we were able to offer these young people and those existing local opportunities that they strive for. I realise I'm short of time, so I have to ask the question, why is the Scottish Government resisting? They can create the skills environment that draws our pupils in. They can create the environment to encourage and enthuse our pupils. Give them hope and aspiration that living and working in Scotland can be. Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle, and I call George Adam to be followed by Martin Whitfield.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. For the second time this week, I follow my childhood sporting hero of Brian Whittle. You know, and it's, as always in these debates, I'm going to be extremely positive, Presiding Officer, because it's my nature. I can't be any other way. And I don't see the dystopian view of Scottish higher education sector that some, not all, but some of the opposition members seem to be talking about. Because I want to talk about the practical aspects of widening access and how it's working in the real world. The real life's been changed for the better and may actually create a better future for them as well. And there may be some talk of the great town of Paisley. However, part of my speech may have been nicked by Mr Rennie already. So that just shows you I'm just saying the positive Paisley message all the time, Presiding Officer. But with regards to free tuition and the Scottish Government's commitment, I'd like to start with the fundamentals. There's approximately 740,000 students since 2007 that have actually had free tuition fees in higher education route. And the SNP is resolute in its continued commitment to free education and free tuition, which ensures that higher education in Scotland is based on the ability to learn and not your ability to pay. Though free tuition undergraduate students in Scotland do not accrue a potential additional fee debt of around £28,000, and in England that's around £53,000 worth of debt. So Scotland has the lowest average of debt in the UK and is also impressive rises in widening access. Whether in Scotland, England or Wales, history has shown us that Labour tend to put up tuition fees, and the number of Scots from the most deprived areas who enter university has increased by 37% since the Scottish Government established the Commission on Widening Access. And this is progress. And I'll have to talk about John McKendrick, the Commissioner for Fair Access. I was quite impressed by him when he came along, even though he's a former football referee, and those of you will be aware that I have problems with football referees in general, but I found him extremely impressive with some of the work that he's doing and very positive about how he moves forward. But I'd like to talk about UWS Foundation Academy that was talked about in a wee bit more detail than what Mr Rennie did, because University of Western Scotland is leading the way in widening participation in university, and it sits right at the centre of the universe in Paisley. And let me tell you about UWS Foundation. Since launching in 2022, this initiative has already supported over 2,300 students from 34 schools across 10 local authorities. In Paisley, 29 pupils from Castlehead High School and 17 from Gleniffer High School are currently engaged in this year's cohort. These young people are gaining invaluable insights into fields like forensic science, sports science, engineering and nursing, disciplines that are so crucial to Scotland's future workforce. The programme is free for schools, ensuring that financial constraints are not a barrier, and it provides a structured pathway into university for pupils in S5 and S6, helping them gain academic confidence, experience and university level learning, and crucially they earn a level 7 credit that can be used as an alternative to a higher B grade when applying to UWS. And UWS's unique approach comes about from the fact that they're special in what they do, but they also have a special demography because it's predominantly female, the students in UWS. Nearly 70% of students are over the age of 21. And this isn't your traditional university model. This is a university that understands that education is a lifelong journey, not just something for 18-year-olds. UWS is the largest provider of nurses and midwives in Scotland, and they're Scotland's largest articulate university, taking more students from colleges who are educated up to HNC and HND level into degree level and beyond. But that's not the only good work that's been happening in Paisley with regards to widening access. We also have the Open University. But the Open University in Scotland is Scotland's national widening access and lifelong learning university. And right now, there are over 190 Open University students in Paisley. And here's what makes them remarkable. 74% are in employment while they study, 52% receive a part-time free grant, and 21% don't have a traditional university entrance qualification. These are people who might never have gone to university through the traditional route. These are people who are balancing work, family and study. These are people proving that it's never too late to learn. The Open University works with 3 secondary schools in my constituency, Castlehead High School, Paisley Grammar School and St Andrews Academy, and through their Young Applicants in School scheme, providing a funded online bridging scheme for S6 pupils to help them gain university-level study skills in a range of subjects. This is making real differences in young people's lives. And the Presiding Officer, UWS isn't just and Open University in Paisley aren't just actually investing in students. They're transforming Paisley through what the students go on to do, but UWS has taken that a step further when they have a situation where they've spun out some companies from the actual university itself. Novozyant, now a multi-million-pound company, developing cutting-edge ultrasound technologies. This is what happens, Presiding Officer, when you give people opportunity, and this is what happens when you widen access. So, Presiding Officer, the SNP Scottish Government will always do its best with the powers it has, but there's simply no substitute for independence. Scotland's future lies as an independent country, and Scotland will be best served by a full range of fiscal powers and choices that independence brings us. But, Presiding Officer, widening access isn't just about statistics and targets. I think I've proved that today. It's about young people like those from Castlehead and Glenifer High Schools who are discovering that university is for them. It's about institutions like UWS that are widening participation at their very core. It's about ensuring that young persons' potential, not their postcode, determines their future. I'm proud of what we are achieving at the moment. I am proud of what we will achieve in the future. And I'm proud of UWS is achieving in Paisley. And I'm committed to continuing this work so that every young person in Scotland has that opportunity to fulfil their potential.
Thank you, Mr Adam. I call Martin Whitfield to be followed by Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I, like others, absolutely thank the committee, those that support them, but also those who contributed to this very important report. The SNP Scottish Government love to talk about fairness and opportunity. We've heard it again here today. But when it comes to widening access to higher education, I'm afraid that rhetoric rings hollow. Its response to the Education and Children and Young Persons Committee report on widening access shows a government that is failing to deliver at the moment. And let's discuss facts. And I'm going to pick a different period of time to show where we are today, because the trajectory on access has flattened. The proportion of students from 20% most deprived areas sits at 16.3%, down from 16.7% in 2020-21. The interim target of 18% by 2026 is now at serious risk. Ministers admit this, and I'm grateful for that, but offer little more than consultation and warm words. Where's the urgency? Where is the leadership? Let us look at students. Going through the door is only part of the job, because keeping them there is essential. They need to be supported to succeed, and this is crucial. But what are we seeing? Retention rates for SIMD 20 students have fallen to 83.1%, the lowest since 2014-15. Care experience students are facing the same trend. Access without success is failure. And yet the government's response? Engagement with the Scottish Funding Council points to existing mental health plans, those plans that have been in place for years while the retention rates have fallen. Let us look at disabled students. They are remaining an afterthought. The committee rightly expressed deep disappointment that recommendations from the last review have been ignored. The answer? Another consultation. No timeline for action, no concrete improvement, just more delay. And the lived experience of our people back this up. As one young person said to the committee, I felt my school was pushing me towards college and was negative about my desire to go to university. They didn't give me information about open days. I didn't get the support I needed. Another said the system for disabled students was exhausting and fragmented, with poor coordination between the school, college and universities. These are real voices and they deserve real action, not another round of talking shops. And we've heard from members across the chamber today that there are massive success stories out there in Scotland, principally driven by institutions themselves, driven by schools engaging with those institutions, driven by schools and organisations that can think differently. The financial barriers remain crippling. Students told us about the cost of housing, food, heating. University feels like a risk, said one in evidence. And for care experienced students, that risk is even greater. They spoke of inconsistent advice, the lack of a named point of contact. They need continuity of support and not a postcode lottery. Colleges. the backbone of widening access. Colleges that provide the articulation routes that allow disadvantaged learners to progress to university successfully. Yet the government has cut college funding by 20% in real terms since 2021-2022. My figures? No. Audit Scotland. That is not parity of esteem. That is neglect. Practitioners have said the cuts have led to reduced widening access activities, especially in-person events. They are vital for our rural students. They are vital for our students that are concerned about what their next steps are. To be able to sit down with someone who can talk about the experience that you're going to have, to say that yes, it's a challenge, but it is fun. It is, to quote the member, the time of my life at university. You get that from face-to-face discussions. When that is cut, people will look and say, it's not for me. The funding constraints that have forced cuts to the impactful programmes are undesirable and damaging, said another. And let us talk about data quality that must underpin this accountability. The committee supports, absolutely, the introduction of a unique learner number to track students' journeys across schools, colleges and universities. The government's response, up until today, on data and accountability has, I will suggest, been incredibly weak. However, today the Minister has stood up and undertaken to think again, to think afresh about this. And I genuinely welcome that. However, I am concerned that it has taken this Minister at the end of a Parliament's time to come and say, I will think again. And I will give way to
Brian Whittle.
Very grateful to Martin Whitfield, which I think is a very good speech. Would you agree with me that a huge leap forward would be if we used the data from education and health and welfare linked? That would take us a huge leap forward.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm going to steal the contribution from a sedentary position. Goodness me, what a good idea. But we have student numbers. I'm happy to...
Minister. I thank the member for taking intervention and also Brian Whittle's intervention. So, yesterday we passed an amendment in the bill at stage 2 that will enable exactly what both members have just called for. So I look forward to the Labour Party and the Conservative Party voting for the bill at stage 3. Thank you.
Martin Whitfield.
And with the attachment of the unique learner number, absolutely, I can categorically confirm my support to that today. I am conscious of time, presiding officer. But the data... The unique learner number is incredibly important. Our students have exam numbers, our students have medical numbers, our students get national insurance numbers. We number at the drop of a hat. To have an inability to have a unique learner number where actually we can track our young people is unforgivable. If there is time, I'm grateful.
Miles Briggs.
I thank the member, and it goes back to Willie Rennie's point, which I hopefully will hear from the Minister later, is I don't think the government have built the IT systems capable of putting in place this system, and that's at the heart of this, that we don't have that investment in IT in our schools either.
We certainly don't have enough investment, but look at CMAS. It exists across all of our high schools. It is interchangeable. It is mineable. It is there. It is not the most robust system, and changes need to happen. But if we do not address this now, we are never going to solve any of these problems. Presiding officer, this is not a government that is delivering fairness. It's a government that hides behind consultations while students from deprived backgrounds, disabled learners, care leavers continue to face barriers. This committee report must be a wake-up call. You cannot consult your way to fairness. Students need action, not another talking shop. And the question is, will this government act, or will it keep making promises it cannot or chooses not to keep? I'm grateful.
Thank you. And I call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Bill Kidd.
Well, I'm grateful to follow Martin Whitfield, who has given an excellent speech. In fact, there have been quite a few really good speeches in this debate. And there's actually, as is the norm on a Thursday afternoon, there's quite a lot of common ground between quite a few of the speakers from the different parties. If only that was indeed going to be the bedrock of some action, as Martin Whitfield said. He was right to focus on the need for the unique learner number. And this is an excellent report. cross-party report from the award-winning convener and the award-winning committee. And quite rightly so, we're spending time this afternoon looking at this. I was disappointed that George Adam wanted to talk about alternative views and critique that's being offered in this debate as dystopian. I think that's a very strong word, and I think it's wholly inappropriate. I think, frankly, we should look at what the real world looks like, not through some starry eyes that George Adam brought to the Chamber this afternoon, but from the reality of what the government's own statistics say about the nature of what is happening, particularly in the SIMD 20 cohort, because in this context, yes, I will give way.
Minister. I thank the member for taking the intervention. I would just say, in the context of a very challenging scenario fiscally due to many matters outside the Scottish Government's control, there has been significant progress in terms of the 37% increase since this government took power. So, as well as not looking through starry eyes, does he agree with me that we shouldn't be looking through overly gloomy eyes?
Stephen
Kerr. I don't think I'm being overly gloomy by referring to the government's own statistics about what's happening in the Quintile 1, where we learn that 16.8% of 16 to 24-year-olds across Scotland are not in employment, not in education and not in training. Now, we can congratulate ourselves on minuscule levels of improvement, or we can look at the hard facts. These hard facts are very uncomfortable. They should be very uncomfortable for all of us. And by the way, in Glasgow, that number is 20%. In Inverclyde, and the member for Inverclyde is in the chamber, it's 17%. I mean, we should be filled with an inspirational form of dissatisfaction to say this is not good enough for Scotland in the 21st century.
Brian Whittle.
Very grateful to the member for giving an intervention. Would you agree with me that actually there's a real correlation here between the size of the welfare budget and the size of the education budget? And actually, if we got the education right, we would be able to reduce the welfare budget.
I think it is a very noble objective of any government that's worth its salt to reduce the welfare budget, because that means we are beating the problem that we all want to beat, which is ingrained intergenerational poverty. If we're serious about doing that, we won't look at burgeoning, climbing, exponentially increasing welfare budgets. We'll look at a switch of resources towards root cause problem solving and not just dealing with symptoms. The short-termism of this government is one of the most shocking aspects of its performance. You do not deal with child poverty simply by increasing welfare payments. You do it by enabling people to live a life of dignity that they want for themselves. The famous hand up, not hand out. That is exactly the direction of travel that we should be going in, and Brian Whittle is right to point that out. But we do have a fundamental problem in Scotland across all the different aspects of public policy, and that is a lack of data. And it astonishes me time after time to come to this chamber and listen to ministers tell us that they don't really know the nature of the problem because they don't have the data. And this is an area where this is absolutely true. But let me be clear, let me be absolutely clear. My commitment, my whole reason for wanting to be in politics is rooted in a belief in fairness, a principle of equality of opportunity. It's what defines my conservatism. People can make of their lives what they like. I don't buy into the idea that the end product, the outcome, needs to be based on equality, because that is not a free society. But I absolutely believe that we should be promoting at every turn of the wheel the idea of equality of opportunity. I am a product of parents who believed in hard work, taking opportunity, making the most of it. Now, I don't know whether I please or disappointed my parents. One day I will find out, I'm sure, when I meet them again. But the point is that we are living in a country where that fairness, that equality of opportunity is not what it should be. I grew up on a council estate. My dad was a butcher. He worked for the co-op. My mum worked in a paper shop. She wrote the papers in the morning for the paper boys. But my mum and dad expected things of my sister and I, and we were the first members of my dad's family to go to university. And I'll bet there are many other members of this chamber who could tell such a similar story. That is when There is opportunity, and it's maximising and widening the access to that opportunity that my politics and the politics of those of us on this side of the chamber are all about. When I look at this government's record, I think it's the very opposite of fairness. Let me tell you that the government often hides behind phony statistics. And I think that one of the most phony statistics of them all is the concept of the so-called positive destinations. It is totally bogus to trade in that statistic. It doesn't mean anything. It tracks 3 months after someone leaves school. It includes, yes, education and training, unemployment, but it also includes casual work. It includes, for heaven's sake, and for people on this side of the chamber, this must be an anathema, it includes 0 hours contracts. It includes an occasional hour or two in a charity shop. That's not what we want for Scotland's young people. That's not a fully explored positive destination. And that brings me back to the unique learner number. We don't know what we don't know. And to be able to craft public policy that responds to the situations that we're dealing with in Scotland, we need to have that data. I see my time is up. I just want to say that I hope that we at least on these issues can come together. Now, I think the Minister is very sincere, but if he really believes the Tertiary Education and Training Bill is the answer to any of this, it's not. It's not. And there's no number of amendments we can make that bill useful. I'm sorry, it really is not possible. We judge the SNP, Ben McPherson, we judge the SNP by Nicola Sturgeon's famous declaration, judge me by education. We judge the SNP by education. The SNP have failed Scotland.
Always through the chair, please. I call Bill Kidd, final speaker in the open debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to start by thanking also all those who contributed to the Education, Children and Young People Committee's report on widening access to higher education. The support from the clerks has been invaluable, as has the evidence and lived experience of the witnesses, alongside the cooperation of the Government in consideration of where we are going and how we're going to get there, and of course not forgetting the dedication and tenacity of my fellow committee members. Together, I believe that we have ensured that this report is both comprehensive and constructive. The subject of widening access is, of course, hugely important. Higher education should be a gateway to opportunity, not a barrier. It's about fairness, social mobility and unlocking potential, regardless of background, disability, ethnicity or care experience. Today we have heard many voices with, shall I say, sometimes differing views, but all with the same vision, a vision to see fair access and equality for all. The inquiry set out clear aims following on from the recommendations contained in the Commission on Widening Access, chaired by Dame Ruth Silver, examining how to meet the 2026 interim target of 18% full-time first-degree entrants from the 20% most deprived backgrounds, how best to access initiatives which prove to be successful, the impact of widening access on other SIMD groups, and critically, the challenges faced by disabled students, BME students and care experience students, and what can be done to address these barriers. These aims reflect our shared ambition that by 2030, 20% of full-time first-degree entrants to higher education will come from the most deprived backgrounds. Presiding Officer, I want to focus on 2 specific areas highlighted in the report: disabled students and care experience students. On disabled students, the evidence was stark. Lead Scotland's survey revealed that 16 out of 20 respondents said disability made it harder to go to university, and 15 felt universities did not welcome disabled applicants. Respondents called for better information, flexibility in course delivery and staff training to ensure inclusivity. We also heard troubling accounts of low aspirations, young people being discouraged from pursuing university because adults and their families deemed it an unrealistic aim. That is unacceptable. The committee was disappointed that recommendations from the 2023 review of disabled student support have not been fully implemented, and we welcomed the Government's commitment to consult on support for disabled students and part-time learners, but we need clarity on timescales and outcomes. Presiding Officer, the report made several recommendations and I welcome the Government's constructive response. I particularly welcome the publication of Scotland's first National Transitions to Adulthood strategy in July, aimed at ensuring a joined-up approach so that all young disabled people experience a supported and positive transition to adult life. This is a significant milestone, but implementation is the key, and I therefore urge the Minister to update Parliament on progress in delivering this strategy and how its impact will be measured. In reply to the committee, the Minister also stated that following careful consideration, the Government has decided not to reconvene the group looking at support for disabled students established in response to the 2023 review at this time. Given that the Minister stated not at this time, I would welcome the Minister's view on whether this decision will be periodically reviewed and also what alternative mechanisms will ensure that lived experience continues to inform policy. Turning to care experienced students, the report acknowledges progress with record numbers entering higher education. The publication of the National Ambition for Care Experienced Students is a positive step, focusing on intake, retention and successful completions. Yet challenges remain. Students told us of inconsistent careers advice, gaps in support and housing barriers. And University Scotland highlighted that while many institutions offer year-round accommodation, shortages persist, particularly in rural areas. These issues affect retention and success, not just access. In response, the committee recommended that the Government provide regular updates and steps to address housing barriers and improve consistency of support. And whilst the Government's response is encouraging, I urge the Minister to consider what more can be done to improve retention and housing support and how we will ensure that every care experienced learner has the same opportunities as their peers. Presiding Officer, widening access is not just about meeting targets, it's about transforming lives. It's about ensuring that talent and ambition are not stifled by circumstance. The committee's report reminds us that progress has been made, but challenges remain. Financial barriers, mental health support and systemic inequalities must be addressed if we are to achieve our 2030 goal. In conclusion, I look forward to continuing this vital work with colleagues across the Chamber, with the Scottish Government and our education sector partners. Together, we can ensure that higher education in Scotland is truly accessible to all, fair, inclusive and a foundation for opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. We move to winding up speeches and I call on Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And it's a pleasure to wind up for Scottish Labour this afternoon. And can I take this opportunity to thank Professor John McKendrick for the work he has done in this to date and to allow the committee access to his expertise for that. Presiding Officer, I have to say I've enjoyed hearing members talk of the brilliant educational institutions we have here in Scotland and of their own experience in accessing it. I look back in fondness at my own time in Telford College, studying in the evenings for Stage 1 counselling, and fond memories of doing that part-time and with colleagues from the workplace. I look back, of course, to studying for my honours and my master's degree in Stirling University as being one of the most formative experiences of my life, including when I first dipped my toe into politics, so others can determine how successful that was. And of my time too studying postgraduate diploma at Glasgow Caledonian University as the first student on their human rights course that combined work and study. I use these examples to show the rich tapestry of options that are delivered in Scotland, delivering unimaginable opportunities for people like me. Opportunities that my family, like Stephen Kerr's family I think it sounds, pushed me to reach for in the interests of opportunity and fulfilling potential. And it's clear from the strength of feeling across the Chamber that this experience is shared, and so too is the ambition to widen access to it. I particularly welcome the recognition of the doors that access to education can open, so that everyone in Scotland can live up to their potential. And of course that's been recognised by many members on all benches, including Jamie Hepburn, Brian Whittle, Bill Kidd and George Adam. Indeed, that's why this inquiry is so important. But as members and the committee set out, progress has been far too slow. And I say gently to George Adam that that is the reality. The incredible work many do is not diminished because we recognise challenges. That is not overly gloomy. That is a reality check. And we know that challenges can only be overcome if we accept the reality in the first place, a fact that I'm not quite sure this government has always got. Presiding Officer, as Douglas Ross reminded us, the committee considered this issue nearly 10 years on from the first report of the Commissioner. And yet so much is still outstanding. The unique learner number is just one example of where this government has failed to act. They've had 10 years and multiple opportunities, as many members have said, including in the Education Bill earlier this year, but they rejected amendments, including from Scottish Labour and others, to do it. And I'd really welcome the government and encourage them to move on this quickly, because if they don't, another government should. And I'm afraid, Presiding Officer, this government's inaction goes beyond this key factor that could improve widening access, as Martin Whitfield and others have set out. The Minister set out that it is a priority of his government to widen access and deliver parity of steam. But that's hard to square when we look at the extent of failure to recognise the shortcomings, including in terms of the importance of the sector being match fit and for support for students and its role in widening access, of which we've heard precious little from the government. The Minister spoke of successes, and there have been some, thanks to the sector moving mountains. But for comparison, the proportion of applicants from the most deprived quintile accepted into Scottish universities in 23 was 72%, compared to 78% in other parts of the UK. So we do have challenges here, and there are others who we can learn from. So whilst universities and colleges are working their socks off, I'm happy to take the intervention.
Stephen Kerr, briefly.
Graduate of the University of Stirling to another. Would she agree that equality of opportunity will be elusive in our country for as long as there are caps on the number of students, young people that can go to university, for example, or go to college? And would she agree that the way to create a more qualitative equality of opportunity would be to have no caps at all?
I thank the member for that intervention. And capping on potential is something that any member in this chamber must seek to remove, because we know that it is important that we can get to university through potential and drive alone. And that can only be achieved if universities and colleges across the sector have the support of their government and others to make it happen. And I think that we've got a long way to go in that respect, and we know that with the 1,200 places now not in further and higher education institutions as a result of the government taking them out after COVID, we know that that will have an impact on students from the poorest backgrounds, and that is exactly the point I think the member is highlighting, that this can have serious impact on educational and equal opportunities. The Minister did speak of success, and as I've said, there has been some, but whilst universities and colleges are working their socks off to support all who have the grades to enter them, institutions are doing it against the tide of cuts and a lack of priority, and we heard nothing on that from the Minister, I'm afraid. The Minister also failed to mention that the data, of course, shows that fewer people from disadvantaged backgrounds had applications accepted in 2023 than in 2022, and that retention rates are beginning to fall since 2021. The effect, of course, of that as well is more pronounced for students from the most deprived backgrounds than in those from the least deprived quintile, and we heard little on that. And on the unique learning number, the Minister's response that it's complicated, I'm afraid, just isn't good enough. This is a government that's had 10 years since that recommendation was made, and we're still saying it's complicated. I agree with Willie Rennie. The government should either get on with it or say they don't want to do it or don't agree with it, so that others can come forward with other suggestions or other ways to make it happen. Presiding Officer, on support for students, we heard nothing from the government either. I only got to university because of the support of Disabled Students Alliance and an army of brilliant advisers, but that's broken down and advisers are struggling against cuts. As Maggie Chapman set out, students face significant barriers and action is long overdue. I've been reflecting in the last hour on the Minister's response on this, and I just have to say I don't think it is good enough to come to the Chamber on widening access with no update on a review that only came about after it was pointed out that years of inertia had been resulted from the last one. So I hope the Minister will update sooner rather than later on it. And, Presiding Officer, I don't think it is enough to simply say what should happen or that widening access matters and that the recommendations are helpful. People need to see policy decisions and actions that support our ambitions and meet the targets. And I think we expected to hear a bit more more about how that will happen from the Government and what action would look like today. The committee report was firm, stark, and it oozed frustration that we'd heard from witnesses, but that frustration will not be assuaged today. We've heard nothing on the school-college partnerships from the Government, nothing on learner numbers, nothing on the review and student support, and nothing on addressing the crisis in colleges. So, in closing, Presiding Officer, I said in opening that rhetoric on widening access will ring hollow without action, and I'm afraid that it may indeed ring hollow without a response that meets the challenge of the committee report from the Government today. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Rose McCall up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It gives me pleasure to wind up the debate on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, and I'm grateful to the contributions made across the Chamber today. And I want to go on record, as others have, to thank the committee, the clerks and staff and all the contributors for their hard work in producing the report. Now, for me, at the heart of this debate, it's a simple truth. Widening access to higher education must be about real opportunity, not headlines, not political self-congratulation, real opportunity for the young people in our communities who dare to dream bigger than the circumstances they were born into. Because too many talented young people in Scotland are still being held back by their background, their postcode or their personal circumstances. And every time that happens, Scotland loses out, not just socially, but economically, culturally and morally. And so the committee has heard, and we've heard again today, that the current system isn't delivering on its promises. Progress for students from the most deprived communities has stalled. That has been mentioned by Willie Rennie and others. And for 2 years, the proportion of SIMD 20 school leavers entering higher education has been stuck at 26.8%. The interim target for 2026 is slipping out of reach. And these are not just numbers. These are young people who deserve better. University Scotland told the committee that public investment in each Scottish student has fallen by £3,000 in real terms since 14-15. And Colleges Scotland warned that colleges simply do not have the resources to provide students, especially those with additional support needs, with the experience and the support they require. And Professor John McKendrick, our Commissioner for Fair Access, reminded us that even a free education system, students must be able to live, travel and support themselves. And these are costs that bursaries do not cover. These voices are not political opponents. They are experts, practitioners and advocates. They are the people working directly with our young people every day. And they're all saying the same thing. The system isn't working as it should. Widening access cannot be about getting students through the door. It must be about assuring they thrive once they're there. That means that proper funding for colleges, universities and support services students rely on. It means addressing the rising deficits across the sector, where without the surpluses of 2 large universities, the rest of Scotland's institutions would be collectively in the red. It means listening to organisations who've told us clearly that very few of the previous recommendations on disabled students have been implemented. The young people with disabilities are being let down. And so are care experienced students, who face inconsistencies across institutions at the very moment when stability is the most important thing to them. These are young people for whom widening access is supposed to matter most. And I've spoken many times around the issues that surround the care experienced community. It's well documented that change for them is met with fear and anxiety. And that's simply not good enough. And as Miles Briggs mentioned, we don't have the data on how many actually follow through to the degree rather than just entering the further education. And that is why we must do more. Presiding Officer, widening access is also about well-being. When a young person spends every day worrying about money, housing, caring responsibilities or travel costs, how can we possibly expect them to focus on their studies? How can we ask them to achieve their potential while ignoring the reality of daily lives? And it's these human elements that matter, because behind every statistic is a young person who just wants a fair chance. A student who might be the first in their family to consider university. The college learner hoping to articulate into year 2, but finding fewer and fewer pathways available. And the care experienced young person determined to break cycles, but still not getting consistent guidance. The student from a rural or island community who feels forgotten because SIMD alone doesn't reflect their reality. If widening access is to mean anything, it must mean fairness for all of them. And I will not rehearse every recommendation from the committee's report, but I will say clearly that the Scottish Government should heed them. They reflect intensive evidence, they reflect the sector's concerns, and they reflect what students themselves are telling us. Now, there's a couple of points that I want to highlight from the contributions today. The unique learning number, that has been mentioned by Douglas Ross, Willie Rennie, Brian Whittle, Martin Whitfield and Stephen Kerr. And for me, it is the data retention that is important from that number. How on earth are we going to be able to know if it's working if we do not have the data? And the people who are being let down are the children who need it the most. We've also had Ben McPherson, Jamie Hepburn and George Adam in a very positive speech highlighting what progress has been made. Now, on these benches, I know we've spoken strongly about what more needs to be done, and I'm willing to accept that there has been progress. I do recognise that. But progress has stalled. That was been mentioned by Willie Rennie. It's been mentioned by Stephen Kerr. If we do not recognise that it has stalled, we cannot fix it. Stephen Kerr and Brian Whittle have highlighted the fact that careers advice in our schools is not doing the job it needs to do. That is the gateway to firing the imagination of our young people, to be anything they want to be. I'm sure my nephew will be thrilled when I tell people that when he was 5, he wanted to be a giraffe. But that is what we are talking about, that imagination that can fire from young people, and we should be doing more on that. And Miles Briggs and Willie Rennie mentioned work-based learning. I attended Glasgow College of Commerce on day release because I went through a management training scheme at House of Fraser Stores. We must do more to encourage work-based placements. So widening access is not a trophy to polish. It's a responsibility to Scotland's young people, to our institutions and to our future. The Scottish Government must stop congratulating itself. We've had that in speeches today. And start delivering a credible funded plan that gives every young person a fair chance to get in, stay in and succeed. Our young people deserve nothing less.
Thank you. Now call on the Minister. Up to 7 minutes, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I think this has been a good debate today on our shared collective responsibility around improving widening access, building on the significant progress made to date. And there have been a number of excellent speeches today and really constructive engagement. And first of all, I would just want to highlight the contribution of George Adam, who I think rightly reminded us of the fact that we need to consider, while being fairly critical and asking for more, we need to consider where we are in terms of the progress that's been made. Now, there have been some stats put forward by opposition members, and particularly from the Labour Party, and I have to say they don't necessarily correspond with the situation as I see it and the stats that the government holds. So first of all, as I have emphasised already, from the deprived areas entering university, the number of Scots entering university in 23-24 on full-time degree courses is up 37% since this government established the Commission on Widening Access. That is significant progress that we should all welcome, exemplified in the examples that George Adam gave about UWS and the Open University, and the fact that they also signify that we cannot deliver alone as a government. We need to work with partners, and we are setting clear expectations on the sector and are confident that we will meet the 2030 target. And that is in a situation when we also have latest figures for 23-24 that show that 16.7% of full-time degree entrants to Scottish universities came from our nation's 20% most deprived areas. This marks an increase of 16.3% on the previous year. The figures also show an increase in the number of Scottish-based students at Scottish universities to just under 174,000, as well as a rise in full-time Scottish first-degree entrants. So I've put these on the record, as well as the fact that the proportion of care-experienced students at universities have increased every year since 2017 to counter some of the ways that opposition members have suggested otherwise. Now, we also have a situation where retention rates are also in a more positive place than has been stated. Retention rates for full-time first-degree students returning for a second year in 23-24 increased among Scottish domiciled students at Scottish universities, reaching 89.5%. And rates also rose for students from deprived areas, 86.1%, and for those who were care experienced, as I've said, 84.9%. So as I said, in 23-24, retention rates for full-time first-degree students returning for a second year in 23-24, students at Scottish universities reached 89.5%, nearly 90%. I'll give way to the convener.
Douglas Ross, briefly.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. Willie Rennie suggested in his opening speech the Minister had taken 4 minutes of an 8-minute speech to tell us things that weren't necessarily the focus of this debate. He's taken 3 minutes of a 6-minute closing speech to tell us figures that we know. They are available publicly. What we don't know is what his government are going to do to continue that progress, if he believes there's progress, or improve progress because others have said it's stalled. So what are the government going to do to address the concerns in our report and the recommendations? That's what we need to hear from the government.
Minister.
Appreciate that fair challenge from the convener and other members, and I was getting on to that, and I will do now to try and address some of it, although I did address some matters in my opening remarks. I think it's unfair to say that I didn't address anything. Of course I did. So, to turn to some of the other points that were raised, Maggie Chapman rightly emphasised that SMID is not enough in terms of a data pool to make the impact that we need to and want to. And she emphasised the challenges in the North East in her region. Now, they are a good example of why the amendment at stage 2 of the TEP bill yesterday is so important. And I do think we have a really good opportunity in that primary legislation to make a change that will allow us to share data better in order to provide more opportunities for widening access that will make a difference for individuals and for our country in terms of what Willie Rennie rightly emphasised about boosting economic activity. That data sharing will be really important. Now, I think it's also important what people have emphasised around college funding. We recognise the situation with our colleges. First of all, the huge contribution that they are making, both in terms of providing opportunities for individuals to then move on to university if that is their wish. But our colleges are also a destination in their own right, and that's really important to consider in this situation too, because if we want to achieve parity of esteem, we must respect it and appreciate that to the fullest extent. But almost a third, 32.5% of new entrants at university in 23-24 progress from higher education courses at college. So that emphasises again the importance of our college sector. So as we approach the budget, it was not a generous budget from the UK Government. It was an extremely disappointing budget in so many ways. But the Scottish Government now is in a position, of course, knowing the resource allocated to us by the UK Government, in order we are in a position where it's still in very tight financial circumstances to consider the situation with our colleges. And of course, ministers will consider the ask from our colleges, recognising the important contribution that they make and the determination that we know that they have collectively to continue to adapt to meet the modern needs both in communities and in the economy. Moving also to points that Bill Kidd, he made some specific asks that I don't have time to go through now, but I'll give an undertaking to write to Bill Kidd and also share that with the committee on the specific points that he raised. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I would emphasise the importance of the TEP bill. I think that members are being unfairly and unhelpfully dismissive of the impact that that piece of legislation can make in the medium to longer term. It will also enable Skills Development Scotland, which, in terms of careers advice, to be able to fully emphasise on that and to bring the funding for apprenticeships, higher and further education together to create greater agility, efficiency and make us more responsive to the needs of the remainder of the 21st century. So I will meet with the Commissioner for Fair Access in the days ahead, and I look forward to hearing more from him and from the committee on the important issues that they raise, so that together we can continue towards meeting that target in 2030, creating greater access to higher education for those that is their right opportunity, and also making sure that we work together, because of the fact that if we achieve that 2030 target and create those opportunities and allow people to succeed in the way that is best for them, then that benefits all of us in terms of fairness and economic activity.
Thank you, Minister. Just to confirm to the Chamber, we have exhausted all the time that we had in hand. So I now call Jackie Dunbar to wind up the debate on behalf of the Education, Children and Young People Committee. Up to 8 minutes, Ms Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm proud to be able to close this debate today on behalf of the committee. Like the convener, I'd like to pay tribute to the work of my colleagues and to all those who gave evidence to the committee during our inquiry. As we've heard, in 2016, the Commission for Widening Access recommended that 20% of full-time first-degree university entrants should come from the 20% most deprived backgrounds by 2030, with interim targets of 16% by 2021 and 18% by 2026. In 2017, 13.8% of full-time first-degree university entrants came from the 20% most deprived backgrounds, and since 2019-2020, that figure has been above 16%. So a lot of progress has been made and should be warmly welcomed. However, there is more to do. As we set out in our report, students from different backgrounds face financial barriers accessing higher education, particularly in relation to the ongoing costs associated with studying. For example, housing, food, heating and travel costs. The committee also heard about the barriers experienced by students who are disabled, black and minority ethnic or care experienced. The committee received evidence from disabled students, and the majority of whom stated that they had received lower grades than expected for a reason related to being disabled. They found it harder to go to university because of something related to being disabled, and they didn't feel that Scottish universities welcomed and encouraged disabled applicants. From black and minority ethnic students, the committee heard that it would be helpful if there was a greater awareness of widening access programmes available across Scotland for pupils, teachers and parents and carers of pupils aspiring to go to university. If there was continuous professional development for staff offering information, advice and guidance, including school careers advisors. If there was greater financial support for students, including help and advice in relation to student accommodation, affordability and availability. The students also indicated that it would also be helpful if the myth that university is only for the select few was removed and there were support programmes which encourage pupils to be their best self and promote positive actions and destinations. Barriers highlighted by care experienced students included variable information on transitions to university, which is dependent on the individual support networks, inconsistency of support available across the board, and concerns regarding the retention of care experienced students. The need for consistent careers advice at school with bespoke advice and information about their support entitlements. That is why we said that although the widening access targets relate to students from deprived areas, it is important to consider young people from backgrounds, including disabled and BME students, as part of the widening access agenda. Other members have reflected on these today, as well as measures used to identify those eligible for widening access programmes and the possibilities offered by free school meal data and a unique learner number. So if I can go on to the debate contributions from others, Presiding Officer, as is normal practice. Miles Briggs gave practical examples of positive destinations and the positive journeys to get there. And it was great to hear the positive work happening between the workplace, universities and colleges that's already happening. He spoke about the good work at RGU, and I too would like to thank them for their briefing that they gave me. Of course, North East also has the joint working of another good example, which is Nescol and Shell and the Girls in Energy initiative, and that's just a fantastic initiative. Pam Duncan-Glancy spoke about the tertiary bill, and of course it's just finished at stage 2, and I'm looking forward to see what stage 3 brings and see if we can work together in any amendments that arises. And she also spoke about the difficulties facing part-time students. And I agree, more needs to be done, and I look forward to working together with her to try and find a solution. Maggie Chapman spoke about education, the cornerstone of... I really don't have time, I'm sorry. Maggie Chapman spoke about the education is the cornerstone of our society, and she gave a valuable insight into what the North East has to offer. Of course, Aberdeen is the next net zero capital of the world, but it is also the city who had at one time more universities than the whole of England put together. Aberdeen, once again, punching above its weight. Now, if I can go to Willie Rennie, he spoke about the fantastic work happening in his constituency, and he also spoke about the St Andrews breaking down the barriers that I spoke about earlier that students feel they have, and hopefully no longer being seen as an elite establishment. And it shows that nothing is impossible if you put your mind to it. Jamie Hepburn spoke about a fairer society and growing our economy, and he also spoke about tuition fees and would he have been able to go to higher education if they hadn't been free. It's a barrier for the very people we wanted to hear from at committee, and it was good to hear from him. Brian Whittle spoke about the students and their passion and need, and how we need appropriate education. Totally agree with that. That's why apprenticeships are so important. Education, whether that be in schools, colleges or in universities and working with businesses to grow our people is important. One size doesn't always fit all, and it's why widening access is so important. George Adam, well, it wouldn't be a George Adam speech without Paisley. There's no punch without Judy. And although he claimed that Willie Rennie stole half of his speech, he still managed to give us more information on the positive destinations of our young people and their potential. Martin Whitfield, I found it, I'm going to be honest, it was disappointing to hear the negativity from him when this report had full committee support. While we absolutely recognise there is still work to be done, there is always work to be done, but things are progressing. Stephen Kerr, I can't comment on his contribution as I genuinely didn't hear him speak to the report that the committee worked hard on, and it was a committee report and not an SNP one. Bill Kidd got back to the actual report, and I thank him for his measured approach. I am running out of time, so I will crack on. Presiding Officer, it is important to recognise the work that is being done to support students from deprived areas in higher education, as well as the students from backgrounds, including disabled, BME and care experienced, and the successes that there have been, such as the increase in the numbers and proportion of students from the 20% most deprived backgrounds, the number of care experienced students being at a record level, and the number of care experienced students in relation to articulation being above the level of the general population. However, we can always do better, and further measures are needed to improve access for all these groups, and I therefore welcome what has been said in that regard today. We should be proud of what has been achieved so far and be ready to push on to greater success.
Thank you, Ms Dunbar. That concludes the debate on the Education, Children and Young People's Committee report on widening access to higher education. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, and that is indeed decision time, and there is only one question to be put as a result of today's business. The question is that motion 19984 in the name of Douglas Ross on behalf of the Education, Children and Young People's Committee on widening access in higher education be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. That concludes point of order. Keith Brown.
Today, the First Minister's questions included an exchange with Anis Sarwar and the First Minister, where Mr Sarwar referenced comments made by the First Minister referenced comments made by Mr Sarwar about the number of people using private health care in Scotland. The First Minister said previously he believed Anis Sarwar claimed 1 in 6 of the population were using private health care, describing this as a ludicrously nonsensical figure. However, having checked the record of Anis Sarwar on the 26th of June, he in fact claimed almost 1 in 3 Scots were using private healthcare, an even more ludicrously nonsensical suggestion given in reality that that figure is closer to 1 in 25. Can you advise if the First Minister should correct the record, given the importance of accuracy and given Mr Sarwar's claim was even more ridiculous than previously suggested?
Thank you, Mr Brown. As you'll be aware, the contents of members' contributions is not a matter for the Chair. And with that, I close this meeting of Parliament.